Hello, good morning, everyone. How are you? Good? All right, let's try it again. How are you? Good. So in the time we have together today, let's talk about failure. We'll talk about success, but failure is harder to talk about. So we'll talk about failure, success, and how to go from failure to success. And we'll wrap up with a discussion on mental wellness and grit. So first, let's start with the story. So imagine a young boy who, at the age of 5, he lost his father. He grew up with an abusive relationship with his stepfather. They never really got along. By 16, he dropped out of school. By 17, he had already been fired from 4 jobs. Growing up over the next 20 years, he held many jobs. He was a ship worker, a fireman, he worked on tires, but he never held a job for very long, and he always lived very, very poor. He got married and then divorced, and his oldest son died at the age of 20. He then became depressed for many, many years. In his 40s, he started working as a cook, and he became absorbed. He started selling chicken. In his 60s, he started selling recipes. In his 70s, a company. Today, there are 23,000 locations, and the company is worth $8.5 billion. So who is this man? Yes, this is Harlan David Sanders, Colonel Sanders, and the company is KFC. So what are some of the important points here? So this is a man that started from a very simple background. The cards were stacked against him, and yet he was able to achieve great success. However, his path, as you noticed, is filled with exploration, uncertainty, and failure. What was the timeline of his success? This is a very important question and a central question of our time together today. Too often, our successes and our failures are defined by those around us. And it's time to change the timeline on the timeline of succeeding after failure. As the next generation and the key holders of our society, it's up to us to determine our response to failure and how to move past it. So before we begin, let's discuss failure and success. Let's define them. Success is multidimensional, like a cube. Let's see if we can get it. Like a cube. There are many components, and the dictionary definition is the act or achievement of something. Harvard Business Review has its own definition of success, and it includes having a good job, a good title, pride, salary, many other things. My definition of success is simple. Success is defining your own values, living accordingly, and having the mental fortitude to overcoming failure. Success is defining your own values, living accordingly, and having the mental fortitude to overcoming failure. Let's take the example of a surgeon, a medical doctor who performs operations. In the US, it takes 13 years after high school to become a surgeon. You need to really want it. I mean, from top scores to getting into medical school, which often has unbelievably low acceptance rates, to being accepted into competitive training programs, working 90 to 100 hours a week for months and years on end. It really does take a lot of effort. And by the end, a surgeon is part of your identity. Surgeons have accomplished their aim, fulfilling the dictionary definition of success. Surgeons, by the end, will have a good job title, career, salary, etc., fulfilling the Harvard definition. And importantly, surgeons will have defined their own values and will live accordingly. Going deeper, surgeons will have built the mental fortitude over overnight calls, being in the hospital for 30 hours, crafting their skills to overcome the unique challenges and demands of their career. Now, to continue talking about failure, we have to talk about time, because going from failure to success takes time. Time is the fourth dimension, and when added to a cube in geometry, is known as a tesseract. Let's see. So, failure is defined as the act or the omission of an occurrence. And my definition of failure stems from my definition of success. So if success is defining your values and living accordingly, then failure is having your values defined by someone else or not living in accordance with your own values. And if success is having the mental fortitude to overcoming failure, then failure is the lack of that mental fortitude. When I was in the 9th standard, around age 14, I was interested in doing research. I didn't, to be honest, exactly know what research was, but something about the scientific process was interesting to me. I emailed over 50 professors at a university nearby, and one of them accepted me to volunteer. When I got there, I was thrown into this world of complex computational theoretical chemistry. Molecular dynamic simulations, docking analyses, amino acid conformational equilibria. These were just some of the topics I was trying to understand, to name a few. So needless to say, I was overwhelmed. And I was having trouble balancing my schoolwork with my research. I'm sure many of you can relate to sometimes feeling overworked or overstressed with the amount of homework you have to do. So over the first year of research, 0 of my conferences, my posters were accepted to conferences, and my experiments were failing. I was failing. In addition, to get to the lab, I took a public bus 2 hours every day. One time, I was listening to music. It was late at night, and it was a particularly long day at school. And a group of strangers approached me, and they bullied me, and they harassed me, and they stole the shoes off my feet. So I was pretty shaken, and I was feeling overwhelmed and overworked, my world kind of crumbling around me, so I wanted to quit. And I did quit. I did quit. So for the next few weeks, I did not go into research. I talked to my friends and family, and I tried to reflect and think, why did I want to go into research? What was making me go into research? This is a pretty hard question for me to ask, and I, over time, realized that I'd begun to develop an interest and a passion for science. And I decided that hard work is probably where I should focus my effort. I also worked on my mental health, and I talked to my friends and family about being overwhelmed. After a few weeks, I went back to the lab. And what were the results this time? The science wasn't any easier. The concepts definitely were not any easier. But I worked harder, and I tried to learn more. But over the next 2 years of doing research, only 3 of my experiments were successful, and 0 of my posters were accepted to conferences. But I felt great. So what was the difference? What was the difference here? I realized that I had begun to develop deliberately my interests into passions and my own values, what I cared about, and I strived to live by them. A year later, while in university, I went back into doing more research. And this time, my experiences helped me tremendously. I presented at conferences, I published scientific papers, and ultimately helped contribute to a textbook. Later, my research experience would help me even more with my work with the United States Surgeon General, where the projects that I'd contributed to would go on to help millions of Americans. And finally, my research experience was critical to being accepted into medical school, where I continued to conduct research. So now it's important to recognize, after we've defined failure and success, that it's time to change the timeline on succeeding after a failure. As the next generation and the key holders of our society, it truly is up to you and me to determine our response to failure and how we move past them. Stepping away from science, meet Mitra. Mitra is an executive editor for a television show at Netflix in Los Angeles. In addition, she's written for 5 other television shows, she's been in 3 movies, and she has worked at many of the famous US late-night television talk shows. She's also the executive producer and star of a show coming to cable television in 2020. You'll see her in like 6-7 days on TV. How old do you think she is? She's 26 years old. But just a few years before this, Mitra's life would be unrecognizable. She was failing. She had dropped out of university. She was depressed for over a year, and she felt she had let her parents and her entire community down. While at university, Mitra found her coursework uninspiring. She was uninterested with what she was studying, and she was dreaming of a different life. She had begun to develop an exploration into acting and writing, and developed an interest in media and television. After a year of specifically writing essays, penning things online, working in plays, writing plays, she finally got an internship in New York City. For the next couple of years, she balanced her coursework and pursued her passion. But she was still unhappy. And finally, after years, she made the jump and dropped out of college, vowing to pursue her passion and work in comedy. It was at this point that Mitra worked harder than ever. She was transcribing TV segments. She was working extra shifts. She was writing more plays. She was acting in more plays. She was posting things online. She worked relentlessly to pursue her passion. On top of that, Mitra sought out mental health help from her friends and treatment. She fought against stagnation. She let others know her goals, and she truly persevered to create her success. So between these examples, what are some of the commonalities? We both worked to create our own success, and we did that on our own timeline. And secondly, we worked on our own mental fortitude to overcome failure. So what is mental fortitude? And how do we build it? If it's so important for success, what is it? Mental fortitude is made of many things. And the 2 biggest things are mental wellness and grit. So that's what we're going to talk about next. Mental wellness, as defined by the World Health Organization, is a state of well-being where we can contribute to our society, where we can work productively, where we can overcome the stressors in our life. In India, 6% to 26% of the Indian population has a mental health disorder. India is not alone. There are an estimated 800 million people on this world that suffer from mental health disorders. That's about 1 in 9 people on this planet. That's a huge number, and the cost to our society, the burden, is massive. Living alone, being excluded from your community, violence, especially towards women, feeling overworked, chronically stressed out. These are just a few of the many things that can contribute to poor mental health. In addition to a need for greater government initiative and medical help for mental health, here are some things that we can all do to improve our mental health. It's important to serve as an advocate, and we do that by empowering yourself and others. Have conversations with your friends and with your loved ones about things like stress and anxiety. Check in with your own self, check in with your feelings. Take responsibility for your feelings. Fight the misconceptions and stigmas surrounding mental health. Explore options like mindfulness meditation to sustain positive mental health. And finally, seek help and support others relentlessly. Support others seeking help, just as you would if you had to fix a broken arm or heal from a deep cut. Mental health is so important, and it's truly critical that we talk about it. In addition to mental health, to build mental fortitude, we need grit. So what is grit? Angela Duckworth, a psychologist and preeminent scholar on grit, gave a TED Talk in 2013 where she described grit as passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. In addition, there's stamina, working towards your reality and your future very strongly. So out of the vast research on grit, and trust me, there is a lot of research that's being done on grit, here are 3 of the most important takeaways. First, grit takes time to build, and it typically increases over time. Second, it's important to have your priorities align with your goals. And third, following your passion is not bad advice, but it's important to recognize the logic and the processes behind that advice that makes it so powerful. So what exactly is the logic and the process behind follow your passion, which often we are told is either good advice or bad advice? The logic is this. First, explore what you're interested in. Explore even what you might not be interested in, but you must explore it relentlessly and ruthlessly. Second, out of those, identify your interests. And third, cultivate passion out of those interests. This process has to be a very relentless and ruthless process in order to be successful. But if you're successful, you may find that you are good at what you do. You are really good at what you do. You like what you do. And what you do aligns with your own values. And ultimately, you will be successful. Now, in terms of aligning your goals to match your priorities, try this very simple and powerful exercise. Start with making a hierarchy of your priorities. I want to wake up at 7 a.m. I want to finish my homework by 8 p.m. Then above that, have bigger goals. I want to finish all of my projects by next week, or I want to do X by Y. Continue up and up on this hierarchy. There should be many levels. Each time you go up on this hierarchy, ask yourself, why? Why am I interested in this? Why am I doing this? Why do I care? Once you can no longer answer those questions, you've reached the top of your hierarchy. By doing this, you will help identify your passion, align your goals and your priorities, and ultimately continue to build your grit. So as you continue with your day-to-day, I want you to think about 2 things: mental wellness and grit. In terms of mental wellness, check in with yourself and be honest. How is your mental health? How is the mental health of others around you? How can you better be an advocate for yourself and those around you? In terms of grit, have you identified your passions? If so, great. That's awesome. If not, that's okay. Ask yourself these questions. What am I interested in? What do I care about? What do I like to think about? What do I not like to think about? And try the simple exercise of creating a hierarchy. Let's remember, it's time to change the timeline on succeeding after a failure. As the next generation and key holders of our society, it's up to us to determine our response to failure and how we move past it. Success has defining your own values, living accordingly, and building the mental fortitude to overcoming failure. Building mental fortitude requires having grit and a strong mental wellness. As Thomas Edison once said, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close to success they were when they gave up. I'll leave you with this.